Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're looking at game theory and construction.
Oh, wow.
You might be surprised
Yeah.
to learn that a concept often associated with strategic games
Right.
like chess or poker can actually give us some insight
Oh,
into the
cool.
complex dynamics of construction projects.
Yeah, it might seem a little counterintuitive at first, but construction is actually a field that's ripe with strategic interactions.
I can see that.
You have multiple stakeholders, each
Right.
with their own goals, and the decisions that one party makes inevitably ripple out and affect others.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's where game theory comes in, right? It
Exactly.
provides like a framework for analyzing these complex interactions that are happening, and it allows us to maybe even predict behavior
Yes.
and understand motivations behind the choices that people make.
Yeah, that's right at its core. Game theory is really a mathematical framework.
Okay.
And it's designed to analyze situations where the outcomes for each participant or player really depend on the actions taken by everyone involved.
So it's not about winning or losing in the traditional sense,
Right.
but rather navigating these strategic interactions
Exactly.
to kind of get to the best possible outcome for yourself,
Yeah.
given what everyone else is doing.
Uh-huh.
And you're saying this applies to construction.
Absolutely. Think about a typical construction project.
Okay.
You've got the client
Right.
who wants the project done on time,
Of course.
within budget.
Naturally.
You have the main contractor who is responsible for managing all those subcontractors, making sure everything runs smoothly. And then you've got the subcontractors themselves,
Yeah.
each specializing in different areas.
It's a very complex ecosystem for sure.
It is.
And I can already see how conflict could arise with each party
Oh, yeah.
trying to kind of maximize their own interest.
Exactly. And that's where game theory becomes such a powerful tool.
Okay.
By modeling these situations as strategic games, we can gain insights into the motivations of all the different stakeholders.
Right.
We can predict potential outcomes and even identify strategies for reaching those win-win solutions.
And that's what a lot of the research you've shared with me focuses on.
Yes.
Using game theory to understand and resolve these conflicts in construction. So what are some of the key concepts that kind of emerge from these papers?
One of the most prominent ones is the prisoner's dilemma.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
This classic game theory scenario.
It beautifully illustrates how individual rationality
Okay.
can sometimes lead to less than ideal outcomes for everyone involved.
Okay. I get the prisoner's dilemma in principle.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how it relates to construction.
Sure. So imagine a scenario
Okay.
where a main contractor is looking to outsource a crucial part of a project.
Okay.
Let's say the installation of essential infrastructure,
Right.
like drainage systems.
Makes sense.
They've got two subcontractors
Okay.
who are both capable of handling this work.
So the contractor puts out a bid
Right.
offering a certain price for the job.
Ex-
And then it's up to the subcontractors to decide whether they're going to accept or deny.
Precisely. And this is where the dilemma comes in.
Okay.
Each subcontractor, acting rationally, knows that the best outcome for them individually would be to accept the offer while the other subcontractor denies it.
Right. So they get the whole thing.
Yes. That way, they secure the entire job and all of the potential profit.
Yeah, it's almost like a race to the bottom
Yeah, in a way.
where everyone's trying to undercut each other.
But here's the catch.
Okay.
If both subcontractors deny that initial offer,
Okay.
hoping to force the contractor to increase the price,
Uh-huh.
they risk a stalemate where the contractor might just move on
Right.
to other options.
So there's this real tension
Yes.
between cooperation and self-interest.
Exactly. And the prisoner's dilemma highlights how, in the absence of communication and trust,
Uh-huh.
individuals often default to self-preservation, even if it means missing out on a potentially better outcome for everyone.
That's fascinating. So how does this play out in real-world construction? Do we actually see this happening on projects?
One of the studies you provided actually explores this very question.
Oh, wow.
It examines a case where a large-scale project was divided into two phases,
Okay.
each handled by a different subcontractor.
Uh-huh.
The project required significant infrastructure work,
Right.
things like drainage and sewage systems that would benefit both phases.
It makes sense to get that done up front.
Absolutely. But due to time and budget constraints,
Yeah.
it was more efficient for the main contractor to have just one of the existing subcontractors handle this work.
Okay.
So they put out a bid for the job.
Creating that prisoner's dilemma.
Exactly.
So each subcontractor had to weigh their options.
Yes.
Do they try and secure the whole job for themselves,
Uh-huh.
potentially leaving the other with nothing?
Right.
Or do they risk holding out for a better price, knowing that the other one might undercut them?
Exactly. And what the researchers found by modeling this scenario using that prisoner's dilemma framework is that the most likely outcome, the so-called Nash equilibrium, was for both subcontractors to accept the initial offer.
Even though they might have made more money if they'd both held out.
That's the paradox of the prisoner's dilemma.
Right.
In a non-cooperative environment
Right.
where communication is limited or trust is lacking, the rational choice for each individual is to prioritize their own immediate self-interest,
Right.
even if it leads to a suboptimal outcome for everyone in the long run.
That's a real eye-opener.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how many times this happens on projects
Yeah.
and leads to all these conflicts and missed opportunities.
It's definitely something to consider, and it highlights the importance of understanding these principles of game theory.
Yeah.
Not just for resolving conflicts after they arise, but for designing contracts and processes that incentivize cooperation from the outset.
Almost like understanding the rules of the game.
Yeah.
You can actually change the game itself
Precisely.
to encourage more collaborative and mutually beneficial outcomes.
But the prisoner's dilemma is just one example of how game theory can be applied to construction.
Right.
There are many other concepts and models that can provide valuable insights.
Like the chicken game we talked about earlier.
Yes, exactly.
And that's a great example of how game theory can be used to analyze situations where parties are trying to avoid losses rather than maximize their gains.
Yes.
Okay. I'm definitely intrigued to learn more about that. But before we dive into the chicken game and other concepts, let's take a step back and look at the research itself.
Yes, of course.
Understanding how researchers are applying these theories to these real-world construction scenarios is crucial for appreciating their value.
Yes.
So let's unpack that. What are some of the key research methods being used, and what kind of insights are they revealing?
Well, researchers are taking this multifaceted approach to studying game theory and construction,
Okay.
drawing upon both real-world observations and controlled experiments.
Right.
One common method is the analysis of case studies, where they'll examine past projects looking at how different stakeholders interacted,
Right.
the decisions they made, and the ultimate outcomes.
It's like they're acting as detectives,
Yes.
piecing together clues to see if game theory can explain what happened.
Precisely. And by carefully analyzing these cases, researchers can test whether those game theory models accurately predict how people actually behave in these complex situations.
Right.
And they're not limited to just observing what's already happened.
Right.
They also conduct these controlled experiments in laboratory settings,
Okay.
where they can create simulated construction scenarios and manipulate different variables to see how it impacts the decision-making.
So they might have participants role play
Yes.
as clients, contractors, and subcontractors.
That's right.
Give them certain incentives and constraints and observe how they interact and negotiate.
Precisely. This allows them to isolate specific factors and test hypotheses in a controlled environment. For example, they might study how the level of communication or the type of contract structure actually influences the likelihood of cooperation or conflict.
So it combines that kind of rigor of scientific experimentation with the real-world relevance of case studies.
Exactly.
What are some of the key insights that have come out of this research?
One of the most significant findings is that, as we saw it with the prisoner's dilemma, communication and trust are absolutely crucial for achieving those mutually beneficial outcomes in construction.
Right.
When parties are able to communicate openly and build that trust, they're more likely to move away from purely self-interested behavior.
Right. It's like if you're constantly worried about being undercut or taken advantage of, you're less likely to want to cooperate.
Exactly.
But if you feel like you're on the same team,
right,
working towards that common goal, then you're more willing to find a solution that works for everyone.
Precisely. And the research backs this up. Several studies have shown that projects with strong communication channels and collaborative contract structures are more likely to be completed on time, within budget, and with fewer disputes.
So it's not just about warm and fuzzy feelings.
Right.
It has a tangible impact.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another important insight from the research.
Okay.
The way contracts are structured can either facilitate or hinder cooperation.
Interesting.
Those traditional contracts, which often focus on adversarial relationships and allocate risks in a win-lose manner, can actually exacerbate that prisoner's dilemma dynamic.
So they create incentives for people to act in their own self-interest.
That's right.
Even if it hurts the project overall.
Exactly. In contrast, more collaborative contract structures like partnering agreements or relational contracts emphasize shared goals, joint decision-making, and mechanisms for resolving disputes fairly.
So they're designed to shift the game away from pure self-interest
Yes.
towards a more cooperative approach.
Right. Exactly, and the research suggests that these types of contracts can lead to more efficient project execution,
Okay.
reduced costs, and increased satisfaction for all parties.
It's fascinating how something like contract structure can have such a profound impact.
It is.
Like you're setting the stage for either cooperation or conflict from the start.
It's a crucial point, and it highlights the importance of understanding these game theory principles when you're designing contracts and managing construction projects.
Absolutely.
But let's not forget about the chicken game.
Right.
This scenario plays out frequently in construction, particularly when it comes to project delays.
Remind me how the chicken game works.
Okay, so imagine a situation where a project is facing a delay.
Okay.
Maybe there's been a materials shortage or unforeseen weather conditions.
Right.
The client understandably wants that project finished on time and is likely to impose penalties for those delays.
Of course.
The contractor, on the other hand, might be tempted to claim an excusable delay to try to avoid those penalties.
So it's a standoff,
Yes.
each side hoping the other one backs down.
Precisely. It's like those old movies where two cars are speeding towards each other.
Right.
The first one to swerve is the chicken.
Exactly.
And the worst case scenario is if neither side swerves.
Oh, wow.
This could lead to a complete project standstill, lengthy legal battles, significant cost overruns,
Yeah, nobody wins there.
hurting everyone involved.
So how does game theory help us navigate this?
Well, it helps us understand the dynamics of this chicken game
Yeah.
and identify those potential strategies for reaching a resolution.
Okay.
For the contractor, the options might include absorbing the cost of overtime to catch up,
Right.
negotiating a reasonable extension with the client,
Uh-huh.
or, as you mentioned, claiming an excusable delay,
Right.
hoping the client won't challenge it.
And for the client,
Yes.
holding firm on the original deadline,
Agreed.
enforcing those penalties,
Right. Yeah.
granting an extension,
Yeah.
or trying to find a compromise.
Exactly. And game theory can help each side assess those potential risks and rewards of each option,
Okay.
taking into account the likely actions of the other party.
It's giving you that bigger picture view.
Yes, often the most favorable outcome arises when one party takes the initiative to swerve first,
Right.
demonstrating a willingness to cooperate
Right.
and find a mutually acceptable solution.
So sometimes a strategic concession
Yes.
can actually be the best thing long term.
That's a great analogy.
Like sometimes you have to lose a battle to win the war.
And one of the key takeaways from the research is that compromise and cooperation
Uh-huh.
are often more effective than trying to force your way to victory in these chicken game scenarios.
Right.
By understanding the motivations and potential actions of the other party,
Okay.
you can make more informed decisions that increase the likelihood of a positive resolution for everyone.
This has been so insightful. We've seen how game theory can be applied
Yes.
to real-world situations like the prisoner's dilemma
Yeah.
and the chicken game. It's clear that understanding these concepts can be really valuable for navigating construction projects.
It is.
But I'm curious, are there other game theory concepts
Absolutely.
that are relevant to this field?
Game theory is a rich and diverse field with a wide range of applications.
Right.
While the prisoner's dilemma and the chicken game are those classic examples,
Right.
there are many other concepts that can provide valuable insights into construction dynamics.
All ears, tell me more.
Another interesting concept is the tragedy of the commons.
Okay.
It's a situation where individuals acting in their own self-interest end up depleting a shared resource,
Right.
even when it's not in anyone's long-term best interest.
Okay. I can see how that might apply to construction.
Are you thinking about something like limited resources on a job site?
Exactly. Imagine a project with multiple subcontractors, all sharing a limited pool of skilled labor or equipment.
Right.
If each subcontractor tries to maximize their own use of these resources.
Without really considering the needs of others, it can lead to shortages, delays, and ultimately harm the entire project.
It's like everyone rushing to grab the biggest piece of the pie,
Yeah.
not realizing that they're shrinking the pie for everyone.
That's a great way to put it. And the research highlights how this tragedy of the commons dynamic can play out in various aspects of construction,
Okay.
from resource allocation to environmental sustainability.
So how do we avoid falling into this trap? What are some solutions that game theory might offer?
Well, one solution is to establish clear rules and regulations for how those resources are used,
Okay.
ensuring that everyone has fair access and that overuse is penalized. Another approach is to really foster a sense of shared responsibility among all the stakeholders,
Okay.
encouraging them to consider the long-term impact of their decisions on that collective good.
So creating a system where individual incentives are aligned with the well-being of the overall project.
Precisely. And game theory can help us design those systems and understand the conditions under which that cooperation is more likely to emerge.
This is really making me think about how much potential there is for using game theory
Yeah.
to improve construction project management. It's not just about resolving conflicts after they happen.
Right.
It's about creating a more collaborative and efficient environment from the very beginning.
I completely agree. And the exciting thing is that this field of research is still relatively young.
Really?
There's so much more to explore and discover about how game theory can be used to address these challenges in construction.
So where do we go from here?
Mm.
What are some of the key areas for future research and implementation?
One area is developing more sophisticated game theory models
Okay.
that can really account for the complex realities of construction projects. This includes incorporating factors like uncertainty risk and the dynamics of human behavior.
It's like those early models of the solar system.
Yes.
They were helpful for understanding the basic principles,
Right.
but they needed to be refined to account for all the nuances.
Exactly. We need to move beyond those simplified representations and develop models that can truly capture the richness and complexity of those construction interactions.
And on the implementation side, how do we take these theoretical insights and turn them into practical tools and strategies?
That's a great question. One approach is to develop training programs and materials that teach construction professionals about applying game theory principles in their work. Another is to integrate game theory into software and technology platforms that support construction management,
Okay.
allowing for more strategic planning, risk assessment, and conflict resolution.
So it's about making game theory accessible to the people on the ground actually building these projects.
Exactly. And by doing so, we can really empower them to make better decisions, foster collaboration, and ultimately create more successful and sustainable outcomes.
Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive
Yes.
into the world of game theory and construction. It's clear that this concept has a very real impact on how projects are run.
Yeah.
And I think the key takeaway for our listeners is that game theory isn't just this abstract idea.
Right.
It's a tool that can help us understand and navigate the choices we make, whether we're negotiating a contract or just trying to make the best decisions in our daily lives.
Excellent point. By understanding these principles, we can all become better decision makers and more effective collaborators.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this fascinating exploration of game theory in construction. We hope you've learned something new. Until next time, keep those strategic minds sharp.